Well, back again, and I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed thinking about it and presenting it. Now, welcome to the panel. I'd like to introduce firstly Jane Dudson of the DIO, Yusra Ahmad, independent consultant, Rob Jackson of RLB, Andrew Knight of the RICS, and last but not least, John Adams of our sponsor Glider. And we've got a really interesting discussion. I hope I've teed it up nicely, created a little bit of controversy. So the first question, I'm going to start with Jane. Who owns the data, and are there any benefits of a client doing that?
So we still have a number of challenges that we need to address. So we have got incomplete data, inconsistent data, very siloed data. So the benefits of us owning that data mean that we can make sure that we have got the data that we are asking for. We've got the right data. We've got a consistent approach to the data that we are bringing in from 30 plus tier one suppliers that are providing the same data, but we want the same data. We don't want slightly different data. We want to compare apples with apples when we are looking at making decisions on the estate. So that's a big thing, that consistency. And then we can then stitch that data with other data that we own that are on from different systems, different sources, to provide really good insights onto the performance of those assets, the utilization of that asset, and knitting all of this information together enables our customers, so the Army, the RAF, real good mature data and data that's gone through quite a rigorous process before it gets to them, whilst they look at it and they can test scenarios against that data, what if scenarios, and to decide where to spend their money, where to spend our money on making sure that we've got a safe and compliant estate for our soldiers, airmen, and Navy guys to use.
Okay, Rob, and if we can sort of keep these answers fairly brief, that issue of clients taking ownership. From your perspective as a management consultant, can that be asserted in practice? Jane talked about data quality, for example.
I think to answer the question, who owns the data, for me, having thought about this quite a lot and gone away and considered it, I actually think that the parties that own it are actually the authors of the information. So whoever created the data in the first place is the owner. If you refer to the information protocol, which sits as part of ISO 19650, it's pretty clear that the appointee, i.e. the party producing the information, is the owner of information. And I'll use information generically. I think it refers to material in the information protocol, but that includes data. The important part of that is that there are permitted purposes for what the client who buys that data or information can use it for, and includes, I think the term that it uses, you're granting a non-exclusive, royalty-free, irrevocable license to use the data, but you don't necessarily own it. So my challenge, and this is not, it's a challenge for the question not to be challenging, is, can clients really sell that data to somebody else? If they bought it, the license might allow them to do that, but you've got to be clear, I think. And in practice, where we're missing the point is that we're not probably defining purpose for data clear enough in terms of, what does Jane and other clients want to do with this going forward. So, if I provide data as an author, and obviously as an information manager, I'm helping clients manage and specify that data. But I think it's really important to consider what the purpose of the data was in the first place.
Yeah. Andrew, just picking up that point from Rob, because that's a really interesting one, because that point I made in my sort of presentation about almost like wanting to have the freedom to be able to make better use of data through flexible ownership. Do you think current ownership models enable data to be properly monetized, or do you think there's a bit of a constraint there? What do you think?
I think it's a constraint in a number of ways, and I think it's interesting that comment that effectively you have a kind of a root owner who is that original author of the data, and I personally get a bit frustrated by the use of the word ownership, because I think that the nail was hit on the head there, that it's about understanding the purpose and understanding who is licensed and who should be given access to that data to use it for a particular purpose. Because the danger, I think, in our sector is we end up with multiple people deciding they own the data, was really what they're saying is that I have a right, or I should have a right, to use it for a particular purpose around some kind of governance framework. So I think if we can, we should try and bury this sense of ownership and think, actually, yes, there's somebody who curates, who makes sure that, as the speaker said earlier, that we have quality, that we can trust the data. But then it's all about what are the purposes that data can be used for, how is it licensed and thus monetized, to your point, but also from a governance perspective, that we make sure that levels of data which have some degree of sensitivity, whether from a corporate, organizational or personal level, are properly deployed and properly made available to multiple practitioners.
We've had quite a lot of Rob raising a question about people, the originator of the data asserting ownership. Do you think those kind of structures are actually good for the long-term health of the AEC industry in terms of its delivering value to clients?
Well, before I answer that question, I'm a proponent for being accurate about certain things, and unfortunately I think in certain contexts that ownership being assigned to the originator doesn't necessarily work. So if we step outside of the AEC industry for a second and talk about social media, I think every single person has at least one type of social media profile, even if that's just WhatsApp for communication. Now, if we say, or we take the position that the owners of the data are the people that created it, that means we all own our own data. But actually, that's not necessarily the case. If you go back to Meta, they'll say to you that the Facebook database or the WhatsApp database, that belongs to them. And there's a very simple reason for that, is that actually legally speaking, and not that I'm a lawyer, but actually legally, the individual that creates a database and goes about collecting that information, and when we provide that data freely, that means that actually ownership transfers to them. And if we want to use that information, they have to license it back to us. So I think I always go back to this, the start of this conversation for me was a few months ago, and Nima reached out and started asking me this particular question. And I had to say, well, it's actually really complicated, because it depends on what data we're talking about and in what context we're talking about. So I think we have to start from there. But I want to just quickly answer your question, which is accountability a good thing in the long term for the AEC industry? The short answer is yes. How could it not be? Accountability means ultimately better quality information. It means that there's someone responsible for protecting that data. And you guys were talking about monetization and extracting value. Well, ultimately, you have to have someone owning that information in order to extract that value.
Thank you. And I hope we've got John. Have we got your microphone working now?
We do seem to have got it.
Excellent. So so just wrapping up then, that question: do you think platforms like Glider actually help data owners to extract more value? So is this a facilitating role there, promotion role perhaps?
Absolutely. I think if you have data or information that you can't trust, you don't really have anything. So having a process of bringing that information together, checking it's right, making sure it was what was there expected in the first place, and then connecting it with other systems in a way that can still be maintained, that is crucial for us to not only get value at a handover point of where we've just first got the data, but not let it drop off. Actually maintain it, use it, keep it as an asset, look after that asset the same way you would the building itself. So absolutely, we have a huge part to play, and we try our best to put rules and protocols around good information management, and rather than sell as many licenses as we can. I know everyone thinks software companies, that's what we're all about. We're not. We're in the same goal here. We're trying to create good asset information models. So we like to think we're doing a good thing.
Brilliant. Okay, so second round. Andrew, I'm going to come to you first. And in my little introduction, I mentioned AI and wisely avoided going into any detail because I thought I'd leave that with you. So I get the impression that AI is creating lots of new ways in which data can be used and reused, and the training data example is a good one of those. And I guess the question is should practitioners see their data as a further opportunity to monetize by making it available to as training data or what have you, or is it just too much hassle? Is it a bit of a side issue, or is it something that's very big?
I think potentially for the sector, it should be very big because at the risk of getting into the detail, AI thrives on large data sets. And one of the things that clearly that the sector could benefit from is sharing data more widely and aggregating more data more widely to make sure that we get, if we're going to use AI, that we have those significant size data sets that give us the efficacy that those models need. And I guess at the risk of being perhaps a pedant to some degree here, I think it is worth getting into the pedantry of data versus information, because clearly data in its raw state is not terribly useful. So it's how we kind of turn the various pools of data that people may own, depending on our definition and our semantics, into useful information and insight. And by clearly making that data, that raw data, that on its own might not have huge value, by making that available to part of either a larger model or part of an archipelago of data sets, which in combination give us information and insight, there is great value there. So I think that really is a huge opportunity, Simon, to say, actually, well, how can we, in a well-governed way, share that data that means we can take advantage of AI models to help the sector?
Okay. John, and briefly, if you can, please, is Glider looking at sort of like making data held on the platform available for sort of AI training and scraping, or is that something you wouldn't do?
We are looking at some applications of AI, but mainly through machine learning to look at large archive sets of information to try and make sense of them, rename them. We
Okay.
wouldn't want to use that technology for anything other than our core purpose, which is good information management. So yes, it's cool. There's loads that can be done, but no, we're not looking at any monetization of data
Right.
streams at the moment.
So interesting. That might be something to watch out for, which is whether good information management in a few years' time also evolves into managed training, I suppose you'd say. Yusra, just one of the things that I mentioned in my presentation was this a publicly available data, which I think the term is used is data commons. So it's got a lovely side to it. So there's a whole family of this data. Now, do you, I mean, I've given an example of it, but do you think there's a wider case for promoting the use of that sort of common data? And what do you think are the best use cases to sort of promote that and expand the use?
So I think there definitely is a case for it. And I did a little digging around before this conversation, and I saw that there's actually a number of different data commons available already within the AEC sector. The piece that I'm particularly passionate about, and I'm sure other people are, is this concept of sustainability. But really going past the emissions conversation, I think one use case that's a really easy one is the Scope 3 emissions, which we're now being asked to report against, and it's notoriously difficult. I think something like a data commons structure could help to, ease the access to some of that information where it's, it can be shared. But going beyond that, I think there's additionally, other areas such as circular economy, for example. How do we start to get some of that data made more widely accessible? Or let's say not widely is probably a terrible word to suggest, especially considering one of the biggest challenges to data access or availability is data trust. But it starts to, let's say, facilitate, let's say, data sharing for those types of purposes. So yeah, I think we could probably dig out a lot more use cases in this space.
Okay, brilliant. I'm going to take a question from the audience, and this is from Stephen Holmes. So I think this is very pertinent around some of the points that Rob made. So when licensing and linking to data, what approach do you take to snapshot that data at a point in time when a decision is made to refer back to the data as the source? Now, Jane, I believe you've got a case study that you can use to describe that. Is that right?
Well, as part of embedding our information management platform, we ensure that when we've captured the data, that our business areas, so our regional delivery, our FM providers, give us the data when we need the data, and then we pull reports off of that data and exploit it at a point in time each month. And we are looking to now date stamp that and really put a kite mark on that data, so the people that are using it for decisions know that it's gone through that rigorous process, and it then can be confident in using that data. And then that is the report that decisions each month are made, and that happens time and time again. So we've got into this battle rhythm that we take that snapshot, decisions are made on that snapshot, and it's kept separately, so we can keep referring back to that information that we exploited at that point in time, whilst it's then being updated for the next month to go around that circle again. So we keep that as part of our platform.
Excellent, excellent. And I've got another audience question. I think this one's got Andrew written all over it. How could blockchain as a decentralized database facilitate the understanding of who owns the data?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? I sometimes feel that the blockchain is still sort of searching for its killer app to sort of justify its existence, dare I say. And I think, yes, I think that's an interesting concept. I suppose the challenge then is the granularity of the amount of data that we need to try and define, and to Yusra's point, what we even mean by ownership. So I think I turn the question around and say, actually, what we need to think, in addition to curating data in the whole AEC environment better, is to make sure that we think much more about the provenance when we talk about data sets, that not only do we have the data, but we have that metadata, which is who does own it, what are the sharing agreements, what are the governance agreements, what was the methodology, so we can get some sense of the quality of the data, so that actually we not only perhaps think of what technology might provide that, but actually we think about the metadata, the data about the data, so that we really have a vehicle there for all these issues, both ownership, who can look at it, how recent is it, how is it collected, is it from some kind of trusted, validated source with a digital ID, so that we have this more concept of provenance, which will include the ownership bit, and think about the data about the data.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you on that one, Andrew. I think that blockchain is still a solution looking for a problem, very much so. And we can do an awful lot with algorithms, good contracts, good management of information that I don't think we're ready to use it yet. I can't see a good application yet.
My experience and understanding is, of course, the blockchain is very expensive to operate. So you apply it to very valuable assets. And I suspect a small amount of information will never be valuable enough to tie it to a blockchain, but it's probably worthwhile keeping in a database. Rob, I want to come over to you, which is the context of information models. You and your consultancy role with RLB are basically, this is what you're trying to promote. And I'm saying is, do you have a challenge around getting sufficient quality data to actually populate the models that you need to meet your clients' needs? And is there an aspect of ownership that's going to make that job easier?
I think on some projects where we've been able to define information requirements and done that explicitly and clearly, I think that we have a very good vehicle for delivering consistent data to clients. And we can build, we deliberately design those requirements built around things that we can check in an automated way as much as possible. That doesn't mean we don't use manual processes. Where we come to projects where the information requirements is ambiguous and difficult to determine, we then either have to spend time trying to figure that out, or we introduce a certain amount of risk into that sort of project. So we are trying to use automated processes, and we're now increasingly looking at how we can make the requirements automated. We're looking at information delivery specification as a mechanism sharing that between authors so that they can edit it. The challenge for me as an organisation, as a third party working on behalf of either a client or contractor, is I don't have a contractual relationship with the data authors necessarily. So if there is a problem, I've got to go back to the client and ask them to kick their team or the contractor team to go and kick them to make that data right. And the reality is as an industry, the quality of data we're producing is often, even where there are good requirements, still really poor. And it still worries me that even data that has been filled in, is it even correct, is still a question. And I know, just to touch on one of the questions from the audience about, authors owning the data, and I appreciate Yusra's point, there are more complexities to this about, terms and conditions. I think one of the interesting things is that I'm still liable. If I'm an author, I would be liable for that data. And, we have to remember that the authors do have a responsibility to create good data for clients ultimately. And at the moment, I'm not sure that we've really explored, if a client ends up with bad data, what they actually are going to do about it.
Thank you. Yusra, can I just follow up with you a little bit on that, which is, and again, I'm asking you, not expecting you to be a legal expert, but we've talked a little bit about some common data, we've talked about licenses and such like. Do you think the IP arrangements that we've got, do they need to evolve a little bit to enable some of the arrangements that Rob's just described?
Definitely. I mean, from what I've seen or my personal experiences, I think those types of IP arrangements tend to be quite gray. And so what I would say is that the starting point is that a greater clarity at the very least. We've had this conversation, right? We've all got a lot of experience in data, and we have slightly different perspectives in terms of what that ownership would look like. So as our viewpoints on who owns what parts of the data estate evolve, I think that has to be reflected not only within the IP definitions, but also in any IP provisions, any data sharing agreements that are created, or any data exchanges that are developed. So there's a lot of room to grow. The only thing I would say is that we've talked, or you've spoken a little bit around AI and with the group. I think one of the challenges that AI is going to propose is the algorithms. So we figure out who owns the data, but now who owns the algorithm and who owns the net result or the outcome from that algorithm. And what will complicate it even more is the fact that, the lack of clarity or the black box nature of some of these algorithms. So as things evolve, as technology gets, faster, as AI becomes more intelligent, I think it's only going to propose more challenges for us. And we've got to start to figure out, how we're going to navigate that.
Thank you. Jane, I'm going to ask another audience question before I come to you, Jane. And we've got that one. There's one, actually, this one I think is for you, Rob, which is from Rich Draper. And this is a question, this is going back to your point about authorship. And it's saying, he was asking, do authors want to retain their ownership of data so they can monetize it? Or do you think it's more an issue of just control over it to make sure that it doesn't get misused? Do you think there is a commercial incentive there? Is that going to start flowing through the industry?
I guess it depends what we mean by author, because I use the word author. I mean, you could be a cost consultant authoring information, I suppose, not just model authors. I would say that it's not necessarily about monetizing it, but if you've created a lot of stuff and you can do analytics on that data, and you can start to do machine readable stuff and AI, then you could take advantage of it internally, that then ultimately ends up in monetization. I think for me, it's more about responsibility. I think you call it accountability, and for me, liability for that information. If my background is an architect, I have to retain my information I've created for a client for a period of 7 years, possibly longer, depending on what my insurance requires. So I do need to maintain a record of that, even if ultimately the client updates it. But again, I don't think ownership is really. I almost think it's not the most important bit in all of this. I think it is about the purpose and what you can actually do with it that really matters. I can go and buy, I said earlier in the conversation, I can go and buy a recipe book. I own the recipe book, but I don't have the right to sell the recipes on, rip all the recipes out and sell them all online. So I own a physical book and I have the right to use it. I also have the right to change all the ingredients and make a different recipe, if ultimately. So it's just, it doesn't mean I don't own that, but I think it's just, clarity on what we're talking about when we talk about ownership. And I don't think clients should get worried. I'm not trying to say that they can't use their data. They just need to be clear about what they want to use it for.
Yeah. So Jane, coming back to you and raising one of the points you made right at the outset was that, I mean, DA&I, you get a lot of value from blending all sorts of different data, don't you? So you've got the model data that you're securing from your designers, contractors, but then you've got a whole lot of operational data as well. You've got sort of energy, occupation data, and such like. So the question is, how do you manage that to secure the outcomes you're looking for, to meet those unmet needs? Is there a platform solution? What's the way of making that work?
So we've got a number of platforms and systems. So we've got our Glider BIM technology, our AIM CDE that we get project data in, and we've got a CAFM that we get facilities management data in, and we can take that data into our corporate data warehouse. So any data that comes in, whether it be those systems, whether it be Power Apps, we put into our data warehouse and we exploit it from there. So that's where we store our data, and then we can take it and knit it together and make sure that we put a layer of assurance over all of that data to check the quality of it before it goes into that warehouse, to make sure that it is what we need it to be. It's not just that a data field has been populated, but it's been populated with something that is accurate, not just with any old information. And we support that with a common data model that articulates to our suppliers exactly what data we want in, what the attributes are, what it needs to look like. So we have got that consistent approach. Okay,
thank you. Now, continue on that theme of life cycle platforms. Platforms like Glider, are you pretty neutral with respect to the data that you're hosting, or can you start to sort of like actually bring additional data in by sort of like already hosting some of these additional sort of like, the common data that Yusra was talking about a little bit earlier? Are you becoming a bit of almost like a data integrator as well as a data platform, or is that a bit fanciful in terms of the role of Glider?
No, it's very, very much something that we're doing, but we don't try to bring everything together on a project and spin all of the plates. What we try to do is achieve a good handover, good set of data, models, documents, data, and then connect it to client-side systems like Jane's CAFM, connecting through to these systems to make good sense of your information management platform. We're not trying to be the super connector in the industry. We are trying to solve a particular problem, which is AIM CDEs. Where do you put your structured information? Where do you put your documents? Where do you put your models? And how do you keep them up to date? And how do you use them? And when you get into that, how do you use them? Connecting to things like building management systems, very useful. Connecting into CAFM is very useful. So it's not a giant hub with everybody connect what you like into it. We're trying to make sensible decisions about building good information models and keeping them moving forward. So it's not an or question. Are we neutral about data? Where we use open data as much as we can. We do a lot of COBE-driven projects. We do things that aren't COBE as well, but we do use COBE. Our view is all based around IFC, and we can use IFC to extract data and validate data. So we're not trying to do anything wildly proprietary in terms of formats. What we're trying to do is have great checking and connecting software. So yeah, it's kind of both. We are neutral. It does take you into really interesting territory if we have two projects and those two projects have a similar component. Somebody's filled it out first. Can we say somebody else has used our software and already told us the flow rate of that boiler? Would you like to use it? We don't know whether that's good or not. It's helpful for the second user, but the first user is the one who spent the hours putting it into the software. So we're having those conversations around the grey areas. Can we help other users to complete their models using other people's data, or do we have to keep that wall up? So we're on that journey at the moment. It's very interesting.
Right. Excellent. Now I'm going to stop bringing us to a close. So snappy answers for everybody, I'm afraid. Who am I going to start with? I'm going to say, Rob, if you wanted to make a better job of managing data ownership, where would you start?
I would probably try and look at, I think it needs to be in contracts and appointments to define exactly, if the client wants to own the data, then they've got to set it out and say, this is my contractual thing that you're signing up to. But again, purpose, I'll come back to purpose. What do you want to use it for me is really important. I think you've got to set out what you're going to use that for, try and use that information for, and what others can use it for. Can you give my data, if I created data, can you give it to another client and sell it on? So I think we've got to be clear about the use case and that purpose.
Okay. Jane, same question. You're a client, you like to own your data. Where would you start to make it even better?
We put a lot of onus on data owners and making it next to people as recognised as an asset, as an important asset, and just because you haven't got data or information in your job title doesn't mean that you can ignore data and information. It has got a benefit, it has got a use, and sort of be part of the journey, and make sure that alongside our suppliers, that we are getting that right information, because you're getting it in once. It's generally coming in through our front door employees, our front door staff, our facilities managers, and lots of people are going to use this information. So don't walk by that it's an important role or important part of your role to be that level one of assurance inside the wire, so to speak.
Excellent. And Yusra and Andrew, one question for the two of you. If we're going to prioritize the owner of the data or somebody who wants to make better use of the data to create value, who in this equation should get more support? Is it the original owner or the person who's actually trying to create some value? Yusra.
Oh, I would probably say the owner, right? And there's a very simple reason for that. The reason for that is when I've assigned data ownership in the past, I would actually avoid any technical resources. I would specifically avoid any technology people as owners, and I would go into the business to the individuals that manage the engineering teams, the operations, the strategy. Those are the owners, because what you need from them is the definitions of what each piece of data means and what the standards that should be set against that set of data should be, including what quality level that you expect. Now, they obviously, because this is not their day job, they're going to need a lot of support to achieve that. The users, ultimately, the majority of users are going to be people who have experience of, managing data, playing with data, drilling into it. They're going to be scientific in nature. So I would probably say that they're going to be a little bit more au fait with how to react to it. So that's my view.
Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, if it didn't sound a little bit pretentious, start with the creators and instill through various means of education and awareness this sense of being a curator for the data, because this data is going to be used over the full life cycle. And to perhaps pull that analogy to its limits, the data that ends up in a museum may not be owned by that museum, may be on loan, it may be part of another collection you pull together. So I think there's sort of a broader sense that you are curating that information that you may have curated or you may be interpreting from a colleague. So I think it's getting that sense of ownership in an intellectual sense and responsibility to not only create your own data sets, but see how they interact with others and think about that whole life impact of who will be using this over the course of the life of the asset.
That's a very nice way of helping me wrap up with John. John Adams, does Glider become the curator of the data, or do you just remain a platform? What do you think?
I think we become one of them, but I don't think we are the full story at all. I think this becomes more of a connected set of systems, and we will play our part to the best of our ability. And hopefully everyone else listening, if you're in a similar role to me or you're a data creator, as Andrew says, look at it seriously. This is not secondary to putting a building on the ground. This is really important stuff.
So from Rob, we have the risk of too many cooks spoiling a recipe. And then from John, it looks like we might have too many curators ruining a gallery, which I think is quite a nice way of wrapping up. So firstly, thank you very much to all of the panelists, to Yusra, to Jane, to Rob, Andrew, and John. Simon Rawlinson, really enjoyed delivering this session. I hope you enjoy the rest of the afternoon, and thank you very much.